Hello friends, today in this video I am going to describe something relating to the constants used in the C programming. So what are constants? There are several constants which are to be used in the C programming language. So the constants can be different types, like we can write the constants and classify them in a schematic way, like we can write the constants like this. There are several constants in C programming and the constants can be integer constants, integer constant, floating point constant or real constants, floating point constant. We can have character constant, we can have string constant. So there are basically four types of constant in the C language. We can use this constant wherever it is required. So let's come to the first constant, that is integer constant. What is this integer constant? Integer constant is nothing but any information or any numeric value which is used in the C programming language, which can be used in the C programming language and which never changes its value during the course of the execution of the program, and that type of integer value or that type of numeric value which will not contain a fractional part is called an integer constant. So what we have said can be described in the form of an example like C. We can write this one, we can write 6, so this is a constant, it is an integer constant. We can write 1.5 and see whether it is an integer constant. No, it is not integer constant because integer constant will not contain a fractional part, as I have said, and this is not an integer constant. So let us write like this: 10. It is an integer constant because 10 is an integer. Minus 5, yes, it is an integer constant. So these can be integer constant, but this 1.5 is not an integer constant. So we can write like this and check whether it is a integer constant. So 6 into 2. So this 6 is an integer, 2 is an integer, but since we have placed this multiplication sign between them, overall this is not an integer constant because this is a symbol which is not an integer. So operators are not allowed in case of writing integer constant or defining integer constant. So these are integer constants: 6, 10, minus 5. You can also take a 0 as well. This is also integer constant. This is not an integer constant due to the fact that it has a fractional part attached to it. So this is not an integer constant, and this one contains integer, but the entire thing is not an integer constant because it contains a binary operator in between them. So operators are not allowed in integer constant, and hence it is not an integer constant. So this is also not an integer constant. So next we come to the floating point constant. So what is floating point constants? Floating point constant is something which contains an integer part and suppose a fractional part. Suppose we can assume this to be a floating point constant, 1.5, 2.3. It can also be expressed in terms of mantissa and exponent. That is, we can write like this. We can write 1.5 e, 1.5 e plus, suppose plus, I write 3 over here. So 1.5 plus 3, 1.5 e plus 3, this is a floating point constant. What is the interpretation of this? Suppose this is a floating point constant because it has an integer part, it has a fractional part, integer part, fractional part. Suppose we write like this 2. This is not a floating point constant because it doesn't contain the fractional part. After the decimal, we didn't place any decimal point, and after that there is no fractional part attached after the decimal point. So this is not a floating point constant. So this is a floating point constant, this is a floating point constant, this is also a floating point constant which contains the mantissa and this exponent part. This is called the mantissa and this is called the exponent. So what is this? What is the interpretation of this 1.5 into 1.5 e plus 3? This can be interpreted as 1.5 into 10 to the power minus 10 to the power 3. Sorry, not minus. 10 to the power plus 3. So this plus means here it will be plus. So you need not write this plus. You can write it like this: 1.5 into 10 to the power 3. So ultimately, you can also express floating point constant in this way. So floating point constants can have this sort of representation containing a mantissa and an exponent part. Suppose we can also write like this. If we want to incorporate a minus sign over here, that is 10 to the power minus 3 or 10 to the power minus anything, we can write like this. Suppose we can write 1.2 into, 1.2 e minus 3 or e minus 2 or 4 or 5 or 10, anything. So 1.2 e minus 3 means it is interpreted as 1.2 into 10 to the power minus 3, because the minus has been in the minus has been written in the exponent part. The mantissa part is this one, minus the exponent part is this one, this much. So this minus comes over here. So this is the expression of this is the few examples of floating point constants. We can also write in this manner and check whether it is a floating point constant. Suppose, let me see, if I write like this: 1.2 e 3 minus 3.5. 1.2 e minus 3.5. What is this? This is not considered to be a floating point constant in this in our case, because it is taken to be an invalid one, because a floating point constant has the exponent part attached with it in an integer way, integer format. That is, we can have like this: 1.2 e minus 3, 1.2 e minus 10, 1.2 e minus 2 or something like that, but we cannot have, see, this part is valid, this part is also valid, this part is valid, but this part, for this part, the entire thing becomes invalid, because this floating point constant cannot have an exponent part containing this fractional representation like this 3.5. So this is also, and this is an invalid floating point constant, just as this was an invalid floating point constant. So these are a few examples of the floating point constants. So now comes the character constant part. We are now going to describe or explain in brief what is a character constant. So character constants are something which never changes its value during the execution of the program, and which is represented by a single character enclosed within single quotes, like this. Suppose for character constant, we can take like this. Character constants, like these are character constants. Examples can be, we'll write a few things over here and see which are the valid and which are the invalid ones. So we'll just get it clearly. Example, character constant can be, I will take it like this: single quote A, single quote. So I've written like this: single quote B, single quote, single quote 3, single quote. Single quote 3, single quote, single quote capital A, single quote, single quote @ single quote. I would like to write like this: A, I can write 3, I can write question mark, I can write $1, I can write $1 in this way, I can write a question mark in this way. So let's see which are the character constants and which are not. This is a character constant because it contains one character within single quote. So this is a character constant. This is a similar way. In a similar way, this is also a character constant. In a similar way, this is also a character constant. This is also a character constant. This is also a character constant. But this is never a character constant because it is not enclosed. It contains a single character, but it is not enclosed within single quote. So this is not to be taken as a valid character constant. So this is not a valid character constant. It is an invalid character constant. So we have put a cross mark over this A. And this is also not a character constant, definitely, because it also doesn't contain any single quote. We can also think of this. This is also an invalid one. This is also an invalid one. And after that, we have taken which one? I have taken a dollar, which is inside single quote. So it is a character constant. Definitely, it is a character constant. Suppose we have taken this one, question mark within single quote, character constant, invalid character constant. This is a valid character constant. And suppose we can also write like this. If we write like this, 22, or write like this, A1. If you write like this, 33, or suppose it is 32, no repetition of characters. Suppose we write like this, 32. So let's see whether it is integer constant. It is not an integer constant due to the fact that it contains two characters. That is, twice the 2 has been written. So that's why it is not an integer constant. It's an invalid one. This is, I think, what we have written over here, A1. So A1 also contains two characters placed within single quotes. This is also placed within single quote, but since both are containing two characters, in spite of the fact that they are placed within single quote, they are not to be taken as valid character constants because character constant doesn't contain two characters. So this is also an invalid one. This is also an invalid one due to the similar reasons, due to the same reason rather. So this is a brief explanation of how character constants can be taken in a C programming scenario. Now string constant, what is this string constant? So we come to the last part of this video, that is, we come to the string constant. What is a string constant? A string constant is some constant or some expression which is not changed during the course of execution of the program, and which can contain single character, more than single characters, multiple characters, that is multiple characters enclosed in double quotes. So string constant can be like this. We can write like a few examples and see which are string constants, which are not string constants. Like this, we can write like this, ABC. We can write like this, 1, 2, 3. We can write like this, A1, B. We can write like this, single quote A. We can write this double quote A. We can write double quote question mark. We can write a single quote question mark. We can write question mark @ 1, 2 within double quote, question mark 1, 2 @ within single quote. Let's see which are string constants and which are not. Suppose this is a multiple character, this is a combination of multiple characters ABC enclosed within double quotes. So it is a string constant. This is similarly a string constant. This is also similarly a string constant. This is not a string constant as it doesn't contain double quotes. It contains a single character. It can be a string constant, can contain a single character as well, as we see over here, enclosed in double quotes, then it is a string constant. But if a single character is enclosed in a single quote, this is not a string constant, this is a character constant. So this one, single character enclosed in double quotes, string constant. This is not a string constant, it is a character constant. And so these are a few examples. So suppose there are some complicated examples as well. Let us see this, double quote, question mark @ 1, 2 double quote. So double quotes, within double quotes, these 4 characters are taken. This is a string constant. But similar expression, I have written a similar expression like this over here, enclosed in single quote. So this is not a string constant as it is enclosed in single quote. So these are this is the basic overview of the constants which we use in our C programming language. So if you have any doubts or queries regarding this video, you can well post your doubts and queries in the comment section below so that I can address them. Thanks for watching my video.